Now, one of the things I used to enjoy doing more than I'm able to do now is to go out fishing. I have a fishing license in my wallet. I think I've used it once, maybe twice. I just don't get the time anymore. Between school and here and her, and not Sarah, the baby. Here I'm big. Yeah, I had to clarify there, right? I don't want to get in trouble. Just don't get the time much anymore. Now, one thing that was always frustrating, though, whenever I did get to go out fishing, was when you got home, you got to tell the great big fish you caught. Everyone would always, there was this expectation. You had to subtract a few inches off of what was told, right? Because there was this thing called a fish story, right? Because fishermen have a tendency to do what? Exaggerate, right? They like to exaggerate the size of their catch. They're notorious about this. I actually know some people, especially when it gets to the legal limits for what you can keep, you put them on the ground, you lay out the tape measure, and then you step on them just a little, make them a little bigger, right? Hey, he got to 14 inches, I'm good. Then, of course, there was that one that, got to the edge of the boat, but got away. How big was that fish? That was the biggest fish you've ever seen, isn't it? Because if it got away, it had to be bigger than if I ever caught it, because I saw it in the water. I almost had it. That would have been the catch of a lifetime. So for those of us honest fishermen, those non-exaggerating fishermen, those like myself and Walt, right? It makes life really difficult if you don't have photos and evidence of the size and the weight of your fish, because nobody's going to believe you. I imagine that's why Walt doesn't tell us too much about the catches he's made, because he doesn't think any of us will believe him. Could there actually be an honest fisherman? Well, we're looking at one, right, Walt? The problem with fish stories is that with every retelling, the fish has to be a little bigger than the time before, right? I caught this 12-inch largemouth, Then it was we get home and it's 14 inches, right? Then we get to get out with our buddies and it's 16 inches, right? Then you get a little farther, and I see that fish mounted on the wall at Bass Pro Shop. Mine was bigger. Fish stories always have to get bigger. And the more painful the recalling becomes, it becomes more painful each time because your desire for the fish becomes greater. That one got away, it just inflates in our memory. Fish stories would be comical and innocent if we only told fish stories about fish. Unfortunately, fish stories seem to penetrate every aspect of our being. Exaggeration and embellishment seems to be a temptation that every single one of us falls into at some point in time or another. I can especially attest to this weekend because in the last 2 days I've refereed 12 hockey games. And I can tell you, it just amazes me every time, the difference between what one coach sees and the other coach sees and how they tell it. And the way they told it during the game and the way they told it after the game. And how you can lose, 8-0, but the referees lost the game for you because of that one bad call, right? And it just, what are we looking at here? Are we looking at the same thing? The more personal the story, the stronger the pain. The greater the threat to our integrity and sense of self-worth, the greater the likelihood that we are tempted to exaggerate. When we talk about forgiveness, don't groan yet, right? Because it's going to get worse. When we talk about forgiveness, we need to realize just how difficult it is. I don't think we need to realize. We know that, don't we? It's hard. But in realizing how difficult it is, I think we need to be able to see that we make something already difficult so much harder and even impossible for ourselves. We make it harder than we have to. When we begin to embellish the wrong committed against us, and we begin to establish through embellishment and convenient blindness our complete and total innocence in the matter. We build an impregnable wall against forgiveness and reconciliation, making the person that has committed the wrong into someone much worse than they actually are makes forgiveness impossible. Forgiveness is not possible without truth. And we have to always remember that a half-truth can never be a truth. Therefore, any embellishment or exaggeration does not bear forth truth, and therefore, embellishments and exaggerations can't be forgiven. Exodus chapter 20, verse 16 is part of the Ten Commandments. You know which one it is? You shall not, but you all knew that first part, right? You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. We have a responsibility as Christians to remember truthfully what has been done to us and what we have done. For us to retell a story in an exaggerated fashion, or to retell something as factual memory that is an impossibility for us to know, such as, you cannot know what the other person intended, what they were thinking, what they were believing, what they wanted. You can't know any of those things. To try to recount those kinds of things as this is what has happened, we are bearing false witness. It is a physical impossibility for you to know what another person is intending, thinking, or feeling when the supposed wrong is committed. To bear false witness is not just about being an unrighteous act in conflict with the Ten Commandments. That's a small part of it. We've talked about this before. The things like the Ten Commandments and commands from God, such are not about as much about right and wrong as much as they are about peace, love, relationship, what is good for us. It's not so much that bearing false witness is wrong as much as it is, what does it do to you? What does it do to the people around you? What does it do to your ability to receive and to live in the peace and rest that God has called you for? It's not, it is wrong. We can't get around that. It is wrong, but that's not the big part of it here. It is, what is it doing to us? What is it doing to them? That's why God gave these rules, not because of some grand scheme of righteousness and evil and sin and the flesh and so on and so forth. It's about our well-being, our physical health and well-being. To bear false witness is in fact an injustice and a harm done upon the other person. We cannot piece together a fabrication of the wrong committed against us in order to get a better story. But we never do that, right? Well, because we never tell fish stories. To read into, to insinuate, or to theorize, or deduce based upon what actions we remember is to fabricate and exaggerate. And it is to actually become the wrongdoer. It is to do wrong to the one who initially has done wrong to us. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. That's what we end up doing. In bearing false witness and telling fish stories, we become the wrongdoer, committing the offense against the other. Now, the temptation here is going to be to say, well, I don't do that, right? That's not me. But we can't take ourselves out of this discussion because we need to understand that none of us are exempt from exaggeration. Every single person in this room does exaggerate. I'm sorry, Walt, I guess I was wrong. We do tell fish stories. Yeah. You got pictures? All right. We all have a tendency to read into situations and to pull out memories that don't really exist. And we all do have a tendency to allow time to further exaggerate our memories. This is why, one of the points of wisdom that's oftentimes given to new couples getting married is to not allow the sun to go down upon your, right? I think that's in Proverbs, isn't it? Talk about it. Work through it. Because when you get up tomorrow morning, you're not going to remember it the same way you remember it today. There's time for a cool-off period, but if you wait too long, you're going to have time to form all your defenses, to form all of your exaggerations, and to make sure you have set in stone that they were clearly the wrong and the one in the wrong. aid us in our task of exaggeration. We grow especially defensive when the wrong committed against us or our part in it threatens our sense of self-worth and our being right. We need to examine ourselves faithfully and honestly so that someone else does not have to do for us what could be a very big embarrassment. We need to be able to look at ourselves and say, okay, there's my part in this whole thing, because it's going to be quite embarrassing when someone has to call you out on your exaggeration. For some reason, we desperately have a need to be right, and for everyone else to know that we are right. James chapter 4, verse 1, it says, "What causes quarrels and fight, and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you?" What causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? The passions at war within us are the selfish passions of being right and being more righteous than the other. The more personal the hurt, the more painful the wrong that has been committed against us, the more necessary it becomes for us to establish that we are the one in the right and we share no fault whatsoever. In our attempt to be right, we seek to villainize the wrongdoer. We make them into something much worse than they are. Life stops being about love, justice, and truth and starts becoming about victory. Who's going to win? Right? The old joke about the husband and wife, and the husband never gets to win an argument. You've never heard that. TV sitcoms like to play that up a lot, don't they? And so the relationship, what does the husband-wife relationship become about? Who can win the argument? And so when the husband wins an argument, it's a big deal. It's like, hooray! But what marriage relationship was ever intended to be about winning an argument? It becomes not about reconciliation or about Christ, but about my establishing that I am not in the wrong. It's about who wins. When our ultimate goal is to win, the truth doesn't matter. The way to what we perceive as a resolution becomes not about the finding of truth or the righting of wrongs. The goal is not forgiveness and reconciliation. It's not about healing the harms that have been committed. Rather, it becomes about a competition of who can spin the best story, who can organize their support and the greatest numbers to stand behind them the fastest, who can rationalize their actions most convincingly. My uncle is a chief of police in Birmingham, Michigan, and he'll tell you when it comes to domestic violence disputes, they understand, families understand. The first one to make the call is going to be the one. Sorry, the battery's dying. The first one who makes the phone call is going to be the one who's going to have the upper hand automatically in a court case. Doesn't matter who's right, doesn't matter who's wrong. Whoever calls first gets the upper hand. And that's what we oftentimes end up doing. We go to our friends so they can help us blow off some steam. When really we're just gossiping and looking for someone to say, "You're right! They should have never done that to you." We're looking to be the first one to make that phone call, right? The first one. So we can gather that support. In every conflict, there are two parties who are convinced that they are both in the right and convinced that they are both the victims. As Christians, our reactions and deeds cannot be about possessing the truth, but rather must be about seeking it, about finding it, more importantly, about living the truth of forgiveness found in the blood of Christ. Romans chapter 3, verse 10 and 12. 10 through 12. Romans chapter 3, verse 10 through 12. It says, "None is righteous. No, not one. No one understands. No one seeks for God. All have turned aside. Together they have become worthless. No one does good, not even one." If we are seeking truth, then the first truth we need to realize is, I am not in possession of it. We are all sinful, every single one of us. We are all imperfect, and we are all a part of the problem. Even in the ugliest of situations, we have to realize that we have at least contributed in the aftermath. Even if we haven't done anything in this situation, which I'm going to say is going to be really hard to find one where you haven't, the way we react afterwards oftentimes, in fact probably always, contributes to the follow-up and the aftermath. We always play a part. Even if we have done nothing more than an exaggeration of our story. The reason I bring this up is because when we talk about forgiveness, is because to be emotionally and physically abused is painful enough. It is painful enough to have a wrong committed against us, whether small, whether great. And this is another thing we can never do. We can never know. I can never know how much pain I have caused you. What I have done might seem small to me, but I have no idea what you're going through, what buttons I have pushed, what strings I have pulled. I don't know where you've been, what you've gone through, what you're feeling. So it goes both ways. I cannot diminish the amount of pain you have gone through. It's painful enough to deal with being wronged. But when we exaggerate, embellish, and fabricate so that we can feel secure in our possession of the truth, it leads us farther from the truth. It makes the pain greater. It makes forgiveness bigger than it is. And it creates barriers that cannot be overcome unless we acknowledge the truth of the matter. Life is difficult. But this makes life so much more difficult. This makes life a little difficult when we realize that forgiveness is not... What did Jesus have to say about it? Did he say, you probably should forgive? He has some pretty strong statements about forgiveness, doesn't he? He says, if you do not forgive like your Heavenly Father has forgiven you, your Father will not forgive you. Wow! That's strong. Jesus has laid out forgiveness as a mandatory action. It is in fact the only result when Jesus is allowed to be present in our lives. If Jesus is present in our lives, nothing else can happen. That has to be the result of where it goes. Exaggeration promotes separation and division. This is another reason why gossip is so dangerous, because gossip really is prone to extreme forms of exaggeration. It makes reconciliation impossible. You may be able to find a way, you might be able to find a way to forgive a wrong that you have exaggerated. But you will never find a wrongdoer willing to acknowledge an exaggeration. You're never going to find a place of reconciliation, because even if I can forgive Shane, right? I can forgive Shane for what he did to me. It was terrible, right? But if I exaggerate it, Shane's not going to say, yeah, I'm sorry for that too. Shane's going to say, I didn't do that. I did this, but I didn't do that. So I might forgive him, but we will never be reconciled if I hold on to an exaggeration. Forgiveness may be possible when we bear false witness, but the purpose of forgiveness, which is reconciliation, is impossible in the presence of a false truth. It pushes people away. It does not solve problems, but rather it creates more. We have to realize and accept that who we are is shaped by our memories and how they affect us. We need to acknowledge that we are not just shaped by memories, but we ourselves actually shape the memories that shape us. I'm sure we've all heard of it before, where you say something enough times, you eventually believe it's true. Right? And once you believe it's true, it starts to shape who you are, and that means you're allowing a lie to change and shape the person of who you are. A memory of an easily forgivable offense can become nearly unforgivable when we put a sinister spin on the memory, when we dehumanize the other person. We can either view ourselves primarily as a person who was terrorized by people against whom we were helpless and whose intentions were evil, or we can see ourselves primarily as a person who, after some suffering, has been delivered by God and given new life. We need to realize that an unjust and exaggerated remembrance of wrongdoing is not a means to salvation. We will not find justification in fabrications. We will only find greater distance and barriers between us and our relations. So many times we will find victims who are not able to seek truth and overcome because they themselves have unconsciously become the perpetrators of the very same things that were committed against them. I mean, you can see so many times where people who have been treated one way begin to treat others the same way they have been treated. When we refuse to remember truthfully, seeking truth and reconciliation, we will find ourselves heading on a path that leads us to look in the mirror and find a person who lacks the ability to forgive or move on. In fact, I think we'll look in the mirror and we'll find a person that looks a lot like the person we can't forgive. We'll find ourselves in a place overwhelmed by pain, suffering, and memories of exaggerated wrong. The pain and suffering of the original wrong is already too much to bear. Why do we add more pain and suffering to it? It's hard enough when dealing with pain and suffering not to nourish bitterness and resentment. We need to understand that evil requires two victories to win. It's tempting to think that, once the wrong's been committed, evil's won. But something else needs to happen for that. When you have been wrong, evil has not yet won. It can still be overcome. The second victory comes in the retaliation or the festering of bitterness. When bitterness or resentment take hold in our lives, that is when evil has won the victory. It has pierced both body and soul. If we choose to forgive and overcome bitterness, then evil cannot win. It might pierce the body, but it cannot pierce the soul. And it needs to do both in order to win. The nourishment of unforgiveness is the act of evil piercing the very soul and person of who we are. The problem is that in bearing false witness and telling fish stories, we actually nourish and strengthen the same bitterness or resentment that brings us defeat and suffering. Bitterness distorts reality, and it brings us down to the depths of depravity. When we make someone into a monster beyond truth, we nourish bitterness. Bitterness, in turn, nourishes the exaggeration, round and round, until we find nothing but half-truths and resentments. There now is no room for the necessary forgiveness and reconciliation. There is also no truth. Where the dividing wall of hostility is Ephesians 2. Jesus said that by His blood He has taken down the dividing wall of hostility between us. Not just between God and us, but between each other. Where the dividing wall of hostility, which is talked about in Ephesians 2, is still in place, we can say with certainty, Christ is not. When we nourish such half-truths, we nourish evil, and we push Christ out. We become overcome with bitterness, and that means we must surround ourselves with those who hate us in our struggle. We must overcome bitterness. We must overcome bitterness. And that means that we need to surround ourselves with those who hate us in our struggle. Not those who say, yeah, they shouldn't have done that to you, but those who hate us in the healing process. We can't make our company with those who say, you're right, they're wrong. We cannot be around those who feed our resentment or we will only give in to the fabrication and divide and separate even further. Rather, if we wish to pursue forgiveness and reconciliation, if we wish to pursue Christ, then we must surround ourselves with those who instead sow the ideals of truth, the sowing of peace and love, and those who promote and spur us on to reconciliation, no matter the cost. Miroslav Volf says, claims to possess the uncontestable truth aren't always wrong, but they are always dangerous. One of the grounding aspects of godly wisdom found in James is that wisdom is open to reason. We cannot become bullheaded in our claims to truth, so much so that we leave no room for forgiveness and reconciliation, that we leave no room for Christ. As Ephesians 4:15 says, we should speak the truth in love. Truth and love are inseparable. God is truth and God is love. Where there is not love, there is not truth, and there is not God. Embellishments are the result of selfish desire and bitterness, neither of which possess love or truth. As we remember pain, suffering, wrongs committed against us, we have an obligation to not bear false witness. When we claim memory, we claim truth. It is wrong and it is sinful to claim memory as something different than the truth. Where we do not remember, or we do not remember clearly, we need to be honest enough to not claim it as memory and to remain silent. We need to remember that we cannot perceive why someone has done what they have done, or what is in their hearts. We cannot claim intentions, we cannot claim feelings, we cannot claim purpose as truth and memory, because we cannot perceive those kinds of things. The way we remember wrongs committed against us profoundly impacts and involves the other person. After all, it is them that we are remembering. The way we remember, even the way we choose to shape events in our minds, has a great impact on our ability to forgive and be reconciled both the wrongdoer and to God. Remember that Ephesians said we were reconciled to each other so that we could be reconciled to God. If we refuse reconciliation, it is not just the wrongdoer that we are refusing. To be true to the Sermon on the Mount, to be true to Jesus, and to live as his disciples, we must first be true to the truth. Without the truth, true forgiveness and reconciliation is impossible. Therefore, true discipleship and relationship with the Father would also be impossible. We need to find brothers and sisters in the church who will hold you up when you suffer, and also who will not further embitter you, but rather who will lead you towards what can oftentimes be a very difficult path towards truth and forgiveness. The good news is, the gospel is, the reconciliation of the world to God and to each other. We must live it out as we also speak it out.